Prime Minister Stephen Harper will speak to his MPs this morning about the Senate expense scandal. The media has been invited to the weekly caucus meeting to hear the Prime Minister address the issue. During last week's Commons break, Tory MPs say they got an earful from their constituents about the scandal. Senators Mike Duffy and Pamela Wallin have resigned from the Conservative caucus because of the expense scandal. And on Sunday, Nigel Wright resigned as Harper's chief of staff. And there is a new development on the scandal in the Senate. CTV News has learned that another high-ranking official from Stephen Harper's own office was directly involved in that $90,000 deal. CTV News has learned Benjamin Perrin, Stephen Harper's special counsel and legal advisor, worked out the secret agreement between Nigel Wright and Senator Mike Duffy's lawyer, where Wright gave Duffy the money to repay taxpayers for invalid expense claims. The PMO insists that neither Perrin nor Wright told Harper about the payout or any aspects of the secret deal. Perrin left the PMO in April. CTV News Ottawa Bureau Chief Robert Fife joins us now on the phone with more on this live from our bureau on this ever-evolving story. Bob, you have uncovered these startling new details. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what they are?
Well, what we understand is that somehow there was a letter of understanding between Nigel Wright and his lawyer, who was the Prime Minister's lawyer in the PMO, and Duffy's lawyer, in which Duffy would come out and publicly pretend that he'd paid back the money. But in fact, Mr. Wright would take care of the $90,000 that was owing, and that either the audit was going to go away or the Senate investigation would go easy on them. All of that certainly did take place. Duffy did come out and do this charade how he paid back the money. Mr. Wright cut a $90,000 check for Mr. Duffy, and the Senate investigation report on the audit of Mr. Duffy was sanitized. Accusatory language against Mr. Duffy was taken out, language that was left in other reports dealing with Senator Brazeau and Mac Harb. So we've asked, where is that letter of understanding? Will it be released to the public? And the Prime Minister's office says it's in the hands of the Ethics Commissioner, Mary Dawson, who is investigating Mr. Wright's $90,000 gift to Mike Duffy's.
Yet through all of this, the PMO as well insists that Harper knew nothing about this, even though two of his people who are in his inner circle were allegedly involved.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we have to give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt. People who are close to Mr. Harper are saying that Nigel Wright ran the Prime Minister's office in isolation. He didn't tell people about stuff. The only people who knew about this was Mr. Wright and Benjamin Perrin. Although is quite a change from last week when everybody was describing Nigel Wright as competent, the most trusted guy of the Prime Minister, the man who did this deal with Duffy out of compassion, out of the goodness of his heart. All of these stories seem to be changing. It'll be interesting to see what the Prime Minister tells the Conservative caucus this morning at 9:30.
And I was just going to ask you that, my final question, Bob. How much are we even going to hear from Harper with regards to the scandal at that meeting?
Well, the problem we have is that the media will be invited in to hear the Prime Minister's set speech to the Conservative caucus, but we won't be able to ask any questions. We're going to be kicked out of the meeting, and then the and neither will members of Parliament be able to ask the Prime Minister questions in the House of Commons today, because he's going on a trip to Peru and Colombia. So we're going to get a speech in which he will undoubtedly deny all knowledge of this deal. He will deplore it. He will say to his MPs, if anybody else is caught fleecing taxpayers, they will be immediately removed. He'll talk about how he wants to move quickly on Senate reform, and if he doesn't like the decision coming down from the Supreme Court of Canada, then he might move to abolish it. So we're going to get a lot of that, but how are we going to get specific answers to how this thing came down? I doubt it.
All right, Ottawa Bureau Chief for CTV News, Robert Fife, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
You're welcome.
And finally, fewer Canadian kids are walking or biking to school these days, and Active Healthy Kids Canada says that is driving our kids to unhealthy habits. The 2013 report card on physical activity for children and youth gives Canadians a D for active transportation and a D- for overall physical activity levels. The report says by driving kids to and from their destinations, parents may be robbing them of an important source of physical activity. Only 25 to 35% of kids use active transportation to and from school.